Live from the Washington, D.C. area, it's the Inside Scoop, all the news that our viewers want to know. Now, here's the host.
Welcome to Inside Scoop. I'm your host, Catherine Reed, and tonight we're going to be talking about what it means to be American and Muslim here in this country. I have four wonderful guests this evening, the first one being Naskah Zada, who actually hosts her own show here on Channel 10 every other Thursday at 7:30 called Middle East with Naskah Zada. Welcome, Naskah. Thank you so much for joining me tonight.
Thank you, Catherine, for having me.
So it was actually your reaching out to me and asking about talking specifically on Inside Scoop about some of the women athletes who are competing in the Olympics, and particularly the fencer that has caught everyone's imagination, the young woman from New Jersey. And I thought it was such a great idea. I'm like, let's do a whole show.
Yes, we can do definitely hours and hours about the topic Muslims in America and American Muslims. As you know, it's the topic, especially the presidential election coming up in this country, and seems like some candidates, they're trying to take advantage of that and use it as their political, to advance their political agenda.
Donald Trump just had a speech today. You were telling me that instead of like walking back any of his very heated rhetoric, he's actually doubling down.
Actually, some experts say he softened his tone, which he called not banning on Muslims entering America. Today, Trump said that he's gonna do extreme vetting for those Muslims entering the United States of America. So some experts might say that's, you know, softening or toning down on Muslims, but I think it's still the same to me when you have such a strong words, you know, against Muslim, which Muslims, Americans and American Muslims, been such a great part of this country, especially in the United States. It's so great because of, you know, the diversity and because of communities and Muslim, you know, minorities like Muslim living in this country.
And yesterday was the 30th annual Pakistan Festival out at Bullrung Park, which brought literally thousands of people out. And when you look at a gathering of thousands of Muslims, Pakistanis, people in the community who feel welcomed by the Muslim community, you look out into a large crowd like that and say, you know, we are a diverse community, and what we think of as a minority in some communities is not a minority. And we need to acknowledge the fact that these people make up a big part of smaller communities, especially within Arlington, Alexandria, D.C., Fairfax County.
Absolutely, and we also have to know the misunderstanding about Muslims. We expect them to, I think we talked about that prior to starting this show, they expect them to look like, you know, one
stereotype.
Yeah, yes,
a stereotype
one identity. The problem is we need to talk about how diverse Muslims are and Islam is. You have African American Muslim, you have Muslims from Asia, Middle East, you have many Muslims in this country, and then that's when you have to know even within Islam is very diverse, and we have to mention that when we talk about Islam. For example, some people might see me, I'm not particularly, you know, we're not wearing hijab, but I'm Muslim, I consider myself Muslim, but then, you know, and you have many other, you know, identities, and you have, you know, Muslim Americans, and you have Muslim, you know, Pakistanis, you have Muslim British, and you have so many different Muslims.
Absolutely, and so we can't necessarily look around a room and decide who is Muslim and who is not Muslim any more than we could do the same with any faith, including Christians, because the Christian faith is throughout the world, and how people practice Christianity is widely diverse. And we never walk into a room and expect that we'll be able to tell the Baptists from the Episcopalians, from the Lutherans, from the Presbyterians. But because I think this is so foreign to so many Americans, literally they may not know personally people who are of the Muslim faith, they think somehow they should be able to tell who is and who isn't. And I think that leads to a lot of problems.
Yes, of course. And we're going to get back to that when we talk about what should we do as an American community to deal with Muslims in America and how to do that. We also need to talk about how Muslims, we mentioned they're diverse also. They have, you know, different identities. Then we have have to talk about responsibilities of Muslims both, and also responsibilities of Americans in this community.
Absolutely, and I think there's been some tragedies. The imam that was shot on Saturday, to my knowledge, they have no new leads as to why that happened or who did it. But that kind of violence, the violence in Orlando, these sort of objectifying or making assumptions about the motivations of people who commit acts of crime only, to me, heightens this distrust that we have.
And then hate crimes and crimes against Muslim ever since September 11, as we may know, increased. But the mainstream media, we're not paying attention when there's incidents like this happened against Muslims, because for some reason the mainstream media is not interested in covering those kind of stories.
Well, it doesn't necessarily fit their narrative. And I mean, the media has a narrative. I work with a lot of minority groups who also feel that the mainstream media often tells the narrative that fits what their viewers want to see or expect to see. And we become so divided in our media between Fox News and MSNBC. People tend to watch stations that they basically galvanize something they already believe in. And that we've gotten away from 3 news stations when I was growing up, ABC, NBC, and CBS, to now you can basically pick your news.
Yes, and there's another thing, it's social media, that a lot of people, they think they can actually get the real news on social media based on somebody's post or a blog. There's lots of video blogs that popular right now, which is great. It just, there's a lot of misinformation out there that, you can get, you think you might have the right information. For example, the misunderstanding of some people think in this country all Muslims are terrorists or terrorists are Muslims. So that's another, I feel like mainstream media and social media promoting those kind of against Muslim, that they not putting real news out there. But if anybody posts anything, it becomes news, as if like people retweeting or posting on social media or Facebook, and then it becomes kind of news or hashtag. People
assume that if 1,000 people have reposted it, it must be true, and that is far from the truth. I remember back to the 2008 election when they branded Barack Hussein Obama a Muslim terrorist, and I think that was one of the first instances where we saw people linking terrorist and Muslim and applying it to a political candidate, which makes no sense. And yet there are still people in this country who probably believe that that is true.
Yeah, that's the problem about the mainstream media and misinformation on social media. The thing is, it's still Trump trying to promote that President Obama is Muslim, and as if like being Muslim, first of all, I mean,
what difference does it make, right?
Well, the thing is, it's very unfortunate. He's, like I said, he's trying to use it for his political agenda.
Right.
And another unfortunate part, that some people in this country actually buying that, and they are accepting that as if Trump, whatever he's saying about Muslims is true.
And it makes being a Muslim inherently negative. And that is wrong, because Muslims have been in this country for decades, for centuries, really.
For centuries. The thing we don't know in this country, sometimes we don't know our own history. The first wave of Muslims came to this country, they were slaves. Then many years ago, like 1800, many centuries ago. So it's like the thing we don't know about that, and we connect a lot of times because of Middle East situations, or Pakistan and Afghanistan, we think Muslims all Arabs and Arabs all Muslim. Again, we have so little information about Islam and Muslims in this country, and in European countries as well. That's when we don't have information actually to build a case that to understand a group like, a growing group like Muslims in the United States. That's when we don't understand them, and that's when we have situations like, shooting, or we trying to deal with extremism, that we cannot find solutions because we actually don't understand the problem to start with finding.
Exactly, and I think when we talk about ISIS and any kind of terrorist organization, that is separate. That truly is separate, because believe me, we have issues of domestic terrorism in this country that are perpetrated by people who are not Muslims. And we never look to their faith to say, well, that explains why they went into a church and shot all those people. We never go to someone's religion to explain why they did that, but we are too quick to do it when it is somebody who has a Muslim connection. And this takes me back to the young fencer in New Jersey who basically said to Donald Trump, she goes, I can't go back to anywhere. I was born here, my parents were born here. Literally, there are generations of Muslim Americans living in this country. And when he speaks so broadly, he is speaking to very patriotic Americans who have lived here and are very much a fabric of the history and of the communities they live in. How do we get ourselves out of that? I think as Muslims in this country, we need to challenge those kind of behavior. We need to continue. I understand it's not our position, and we don't need to apologize to anyone. I know some people say, do Muslims need to apologize for ISIS's behavior or Al-Qaeda's? I don't believe anybody needs to apologize, but I feel like, I strongly believe, like as a Muslim American, we need to just keep standing up and showing that Muslims are not terrorists. And someone like me, I'm Muslim. Someone else, your next guest, is Muslim, but they're doctors, they're lawyers, they're like mothers, they're fathers. They love this country. They're Americans. So their identity, there's multiple identities but we cannot take that identity from them. As for American communities, they need to, like you mentioned, sometimes there's ignorance and we don't know about, somebody might not even know one Muslim person that they want to talk about. It's like, are they terrorists or not? The problem is we have to open ourselves to meet our Muslim neighbors. We also have to stand up with them united. We have to fight against extremism, terrorists and Islamists together, because Muslims in America, they are here, they'll stay in, and they love this country. That's the only way we can defeat terrorists and Islamists. And today, Donald Trump mentioned in his speech that he would like to include everybody, regardless of their ideological background, with fighting terrorism, and Islamist groups like Al-Qaeda and ISIS, but did not mention Muslims in particular. But I don't think fight against terrorism Islamists are going to be ever one unless Muslim community included in this country. Well, I thank you so much for being here, Naskah. I hope that everybody will watch Middle East with Naskah Zada. Please join us after the break.
One day these rats were playing in the woods. Wanted some matches and that's no good. Listen to smoke before you give it a try. Only you. Don't play with matches. Don't play with fire. Cause there's nothing very funny about rigged out money. Nothing very nice on a homeless mind. So if a gorgeous force is what you desire, don't play with matches. Don't play with fire.
Only you can prevent wildfires.
Fire.
Why don't you just wash your car at home?
When I wash my car, everything runs down the street and down into the storm drains. With all the chemicals in the soaps and waxes, the last thing I want to do is poison my own drinking water.
At least here, it's all contained and recycled on site.
That's why I also take my car in for oil changes instead of doing it myself. I might take a chance on spilling stuff.
You know what the best part is?
What?
More time to kick back and watch the game.
How far would you go to protect the planet?
I want you to build an ark.
Here we go. Okay, that's good. Oh, okay. Ow!
Maybe there's another way.
People, the flood is imminent!
Is it too much to ask for a little precipitation?
Go to fightglobalwarming.com to find out what you and your community can do to reduce global warming pollution.
Somewhere around the world, there are men and women of the armed forces risking their lives, helping rebuild communities after natural disasters, collecting toys for needy children, tutoring kids in school. These are your sons and daughters who work to keep us safe, secure, and free. dedicated men and women who put their country first.
We're back to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
Welcome back to Inside Scoop. Tonight we're talking about Americans and Muslims. And joining me in this second segment is Dr. Basim Khan, who is both a physician and the executive director of Neighborhood Health in Alexandria, which is a community health center. Thank you so much for joining me, Basim.
Thank you, Catherine.
So we have talked to each other on numerous occasions about various things. And so in thinking about who in our community are Muslims that we meet every day and we don't necessarily think about, certainly physicians are not something where you think to yourself, is my doctor a Muslim? Because I don't necessarily think things like that go through people's minds in certain professions. And I think, perhaps correct me if I'm wrong, that medicine is one of those.
Sure, there are many physicians who are Muslim, and there are Muslims, in all types of professions across American society.
And you serve a very diverse population, which makes sense, correct? I mean, within the Alexandria, Arlington, the DC community, we have people from like 140 different countries, is what I think I've heard. And the Muslim faith is very diverse because it exists in lots of different countries, and culture is part of that, which is why not all Muslims look the same.
That's true. That's true. We serve people from all different faiths, all different backgrounds. I think it's sometimes difficult to generalize when it comes to faith or different backgrounds, because you have Muslims, like in all types of religions, coming from all parts of the world, practice their faith differently, have different customs, different backgrounds. So it's difficult to generalize.
Absolutely. So you are originally from Pakistan?
That's correct. My parents immigrated in the 1970s. They initially came to the Midwest in Kansas and then Illinois, where I was born. And I spent the first few years of my life over there, but then they actually went back to Pakistan for several years. And so I grew up in Pakistan, went to American schools, came back to the US for college, and then medical school and residency, and have been in Northern Virginia since 2011, because since then my parents have actually moved to the area as well, and I wanted to be closer to them.
So in addition to your education, you went to the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard.
That's true. I have an interest in public policy. In many ways it relates very closely to medicine, because as a physician you see a lot of different problems within society. You have a unique view into that. So for that reason, public policy was something that interested me.
Right, and I think one of the things that we keep talking about Muslims in America, and it gets tied up with terrorism, and it gets tied up with violence, and it gets tied up with all of these things that we don't necessarily attach to any other faith community in the world. And that is one of the areas where you and I have had conversations with other people in this community, is about overheated rhetoric, too many people with guns, and some of this gun violence that we see in our country not being treated as a public health issue.
Sure, and for gun violence, I see it as a physician. While I'm a primary care physician right now, and I don't see the consequences as often, I've rotated through emergency rooms, I've rotated through hospitals, I have colleagues who see it every day, and the tragedies associated with gun violence of families who have to deal with the loss of a loved one, of people who've had to deal with the consequences for the rest of their lives, both the physical survivors and the mental consequences. And 30,000 people die in this country due to gun violence, and which is far, far greater than any other developed country. And we have to ask ourselves some serious questions. What makes us different than those other countries? What are they doing that we're not doing? I think to some degree it has to do with the number of guns out in the streets. I think it has to do with the ease of being able to get a gun. It might have to do with the types of guns that are available, and these are some difficult questions that we have to ask ourselves, because behind the number of 30,000, there are people, they're people's fathers, they're people's kids, they're people's family members, and we have to take this problem very seriously, and the status quo is something that can't stand.
It seems to me that it's not helpful to deflect or describe any of this violence as being associated in any way with the Muslim community or Muslim terrorism overseas, because the data doesn't show that isn't remotely connected. It really isn't. If you look at the amount of gun violence, who is perpetrating it, the people who would have us believe that somehow gun violence is connected to this overheated anti-Muslim rhetoric are actively deflecting away from how to solve the real issues.
Sure, I think a lot of the rhetoric that we're seeing these days is a distraction of the real important issues that are facing our country. We have problems with deep income inequality, problems with poverty, problems with a declining social mobility, the fallouts from globalization for certain communities, and sometimes this rhetoric shifts the focus away from some of the more important issues that our country faces. In addition, it doesn't really help the problem. While there are real security concerns, singling out one group is counterproductive. It alienates the very people, both here and abroad, who we need to work closely with. And the part that's most important is that it runs contrary to our values, our most fundamental values having to do with equality of different religions, different ethnic backgrounds, and singling out one group goes against that. And while it's easy to understand the tendencies to do that every now and then, it's up to our leaders to be able to, instead of divide us, to bring us together, given the difficulty around a lot of these issues. Our leaders are supposed to unify us and take us to a higher level.
So when you hear Trump standing at the podium saying she's going to take away your guns, and he marries this to people having to defend themselves from his perceived Islamic terrorist threat that doesn't actually exist, how do you see this moving us farther and farther away from the objective of getting to people to embrace gun violence as a public health issue and the things that have to happen? I know you've given us examples before, what happened with car safety and what happened with smoking. You make a very compelling argument.
It's unfortunate because it removes us from some of the real issues that we face. The more that we prey upon people's insecurities or we single out different groups of people, sometimes we lose sight of the larger issue. We lose sight of the real toll of gun violence. We lose sight of some real policy changes that we can make to address the issue. And that's the problem when we go down this path that doesn't really address the issue. And we lose sight of the larger picture when it comes to gun violence.
So one of the things, and I heard you speak on a panel, and you were wonderful talking about, just as an example, with smoking, no one banned cigarettes. No one took away anybody's cigarettes. But what happened is that regulations were actually put in places to where you could smoke, not in airplanes, not in restaurants, not if you're under 18. And so over a period of time, what we've seen is a decline in smoking-related deaths. And it's the same with car safety. But we can't seem to bring that to the gun issue.
Sure, and I think we lose sight of the fact that so many people are dying from gun violence and that these are real people and communities are hurting from it. And I think to some degree it's also a loss of our imagination to picture ourselves getting to a point where we don't have 30,000 people dying every year, where it's half that amount or even less than that. Because once we set ourselves some targets, once we say that, look, we want to get to a place like any other developed country on the planet. We want to be able to reduce the incidence of gun violence, like we've reduced the incidence of deaths from smoking to some degree, like we've reduced fatalities when it comes to car crashes. There are a lot of things that we can do, and we can do it in a way that also respects the Second Amendment and respects people's right to own guns. But I think our political system, a lot of our political leaders need to really commit themselves to reducing the death toll from this. And it's something as a physician that I feel very strongly about, because you've seen the effects that it's had on families, and it's something that just needs to be prioritized.
Another public health aspect to this is, what about school children who are hearing all of this on television, who understand that if they dress differently or look differently or have a different sounding name, do you think from a public health perspective that we are putting additional stress on kids, especially children who are diverse and who are Muslim, who are in our school systems, by all of this overheated rhetoric?
I don't know. All I do know is that it's definitely not helpful. In order to tackle a lot of problems, including problems with security, you need to be able to embrace everyone in society equally. You need to be able to work together to be able to address these issues. And the rhetoric does the opposite of that. It casts people aside, it singles people out, and that just can't be helpful. It doesn't work well, and more importantly, it just goes against who we are as Americans.
So one final thing, because I don't want to let you get away without us talking about something so important to both of us, and that is Medicaid expansion and the resistance in the state of Virginia to health coverage that would mean so much to people who desperately need health care, and the fact that we can't seem to get passed this in our legislature. I know you've worked on it. I know you've talked about it. But, you know, and this is a little off topic, and yet I see the health of the nation being dependent on us taking care of people's basic needs, and this is one that we haven't taken care of.
Sure, and I think sometimes we lose fact of, even here in Northern Virginia, we have communities who have difficulty accessing healthcare. It's the field that I work in as a primary care physician at a clinic that gives healthcare to people, provides healthcare to people who otherwise might have difficulty accessing it. And there are people in Northern Virginia who, due to their income, due to the fact that they don't have health insurance, which is especially difficult because the state hasn't expanded Medicaid and has such a eligibility criteria that's difficult for people to be able to get Medicaid. It's a real issue for patients. Many of them are not able to access primary care. Many of them are not able to access specialty care, and the state really needs to be able to take this seriously. I don't think there's any good reason for the state not to expand Medicaid, and I hope that common sense prevails among our politicians so that they finally look at the interests of their own constituents above whatever political posturing that they're doing to not expand Medicaid.
I would agree with you, because I think, again, we've been so caught off track by some of these tertiary discussions that really are, in my mind, dead ends, that we are not addressing the real problems both on the federal level and on the local level. And I think the whole fact that Medicaid expansion has been left to the states, if you could wave a magic wand, how would you solve the healthcare problem?
I think the Affordable Care Act does have different mechanisms in place to be able to improve access to care, which it's tough to believe that in 2016 this is still a problem in this country, that we don't see healthcare, or we don't act as if healthcare is a basic human right available to everyone who lives here. And so for the states who haven't expanded Medicaid, it's surprising that hasn't happened at this point in time. So that's one thing that I think needs to be done, to be able to improve access to basic primary care, to be able to improve access to specialty care. Having some form of insurance clearly helps with that. But the other challenges, and something that we see in medicine a lot, is that a lot of other problems in society manifest themselves in the doctor's offices. For example, income inequality. For example, yes, gun violence, you mentioned it. For mental health, substance abuse. These problems lead to poor health outcomes. So while healthcare is one component of it, and Medicaid expansion and the expansion of healthcare for people who don't have it is something that we have to prioritize, because healthcare is a human right, we also need to look more upstream. We also need to look at other factors that ultimately affect health and actually invest in them the way that we do in healthcare. I don't think we invest nearly as much in public health compared to healthcare in general.
Well, and that's one of the reasons that I wanted to invite you on, for two reasons: to talk about the issues that we should be talking about, and to also show people that Muslims have many faces, many professions, and bring such important things to discussions that we have in our community. So I really, really appreciate you being with me on the show. So join me after the break. We're going to have Atif Qarni back on the show.
Art, a universal language, an expression of culture, of self. And now, thanks to Empowered Women International, a way for emerging and established immigrant and refugee artists and artisans to find hope to earn a living while enriching the lives of all of us. Empowered Women International, making a better America every day. For more information on Empowered Women International's educational programs, or to make a tax-free donation, contact cfrip@aol.com.
Here, kitty, kitty. Here, kitty, kitty, kitty. Here, kitty, kitty.
You'd think it would be easy to tell which kids have trouble with their eyesight. But that's not always the case. Even though 1 in 4 children may have a vision problem, eye doctors tell us the symptoms aren't always so obvious. We do know that 80% of all childhood learning is visual. And without good vision, kids can have trouble learning to read and may fall behind in school. For clues on how to spot the real-life signs of childhood vision problems and what parents can do, visit checkyearly.com. A public service message from the Vision Council of America, and reading is fundamental.
We're back to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
Welcome back to Inside Scoop. Tonight we're talking about Americans and Muslims. They are one and the same. And joining me in this third segment is Atif Qarni, who, if you live in Northern Virginia, will be known to some of you as a former candidate for the House of Delegates and who also ran in a Senate primary. Welcome, Atif.
Thank you, Catherine.
So your chosen profession, you are an educator.
Right, I am.
And you are also a Marine.
Yes.
So I look at you and I'm like, I wouldn't necessarily pick you out of a crowd and go, he's a Marine.
Right.
But I think the public has been captivated by Atif Khan and his wife and the story of their son.
Right.
And the fact that maybe we aren't asking ourselves whether or not we've ever cared up to this point is to the religion of the people who serve this country in the military. Mm-hmm. Has that ever been, when you served, was that ever an issue for you?
In the military, no, it was not an issue for me. I did actually serve in Iraq. I was one of the first Marines to enter in 2003. So I was emotional about it because you know what had happened with September 11th. I had a bit of a chip on my shoulder as a Muslim to make sure that I worked even harder in the military. I took my military service very seriously, but after September 11th, I trained even harder to make sure that there was nobody that would ever question where my allegiance lied. So that was definitely something that I kept inside, and it was a private matter, but it definitely is something that I did think about. Watching Khizr Khan at the DNC convention was a very emotional experience positively for me. I was so happy to hear about you know, him speaking. I was sad about what had happened to his son. It was very, very sad. I believe his son was killed in action in 2004, around the same time I was in Iraq. So it was very sad to hear about that, but I was happy to see that the DNC you know, allowed an opportunity for a family, a Gold Star family, to come out and share their experiences with them, and it was really an emotional moment watching that.
So all of this, you know, up to this point, we are both Democrats.
Yes.
And we are always looking at the firsts. You know, there's always you know, if Hillary's elected, she'll be the first woman president.
Yes.
But we keep logging these firsts, which after all these years in the 21st century, it seems to me we shouldn't really be talking about all of the firsts.
Right.
And the Democrats believe themselves to be a big tent party.
Yes.
And we do. Our membership is very diverse, and we strive, I believe, to serve the needs of everyone.
Yes.
But we ask these communities, for instance, our Muslim communities, and that might be Pakistanis. There was a big festival yesterday. And you ask them to come to the polls and to support the party who supports them, and yet we have a deficit of people coming from their community. And I know you have personally tried to rectify that.
I have addressed it, as you know, with the Senate primary. I definitely addressed it when the Washington Post wanted to inquire about my personal story. I actually chose to write an op-ed instead. The reason I did was when I saw the rhetoric with Donald Trump and Dr. Ben Carson really getting negative, and it was specifically when Dr. Ben Carson went on Meet the Press and said that he did not believe that a Muslim should be president of the United States. That really, really irritated me, and Washington Post had asked me about, you know, us doing a story. I had denied it. did not want to do it earlier, but after that moment, I said, okay, I will write about my experience running for the Senate primary. And I did a op-ed piece and really wanted to talk about issues. But it's a give and take, though, Catherine. I mean, you know, yes, as a Big Tent party, we want to be more embracing, which we are, and I think at most levels we are. So there are some issues in the leadership, which I have pointed out, as far as taking risks on candidates that are from different backgrounds for various reasons, but also for different minority communities. They also have to be willing to invest. As a Muslim community, one of the things that myself and other Muslim activists who are involved in the Democratic Democratic Party, really try to encourage each other to do is, do more fundraising, do more volunteering, do more canvassing and organizing and increasing the vote base. So it's a give and take. It's a give and take. And I think when you have that and you become stronger as a subgroup, then you're taken more seriously. But also the Democratic Party also has to encourage that as well, which I think that some people do a very good job, some people do an okay job, some people not so okay of a job, and those are the issues that I wanted to point out with some specific individuals that I wanted to really talk about, and I think we can improve in Virginia for sure.
Well, I have met your lovely wife and your children, and who are definitely were part of both of your campaigns.
Yes.
You live in Prince William County, and there is a difference as you move from Alexandria to Arlington to Fairfax. And then out farther, different kinds of challenges there, different kinds of leadership, different kinds of rhetoric. But you are raising your family there.
Right.
And so your son, Saber, the engineer and inventor, what a clever young man he is. How do you think he sees himself? I mean, he is an American. He was born here.
Yeah.
And so as he grows up, he knows you have run for office.
Right.
Inside his very active, clever mind, how do you think he sees himself?
I think he sees himself very differently than I did as growing up. I moved to the United States when I was 10, so I have had my experience of growing up in the United States. It's very different from my parents. My kids are just so, they're growing up in a different time. They definitely recognize their Muslim identity, but I don't think they have some of the hang-ups that other older generations might. Some of the challenges, I think it'll be much easier for them. So they're growing up in Manassas, and we live in a neighborhood where our neighbors do fly Confederate flags. You've been down to Manassas,
so
you should be familiar.
Yes, I have.
We've had our challenges. We have a very strong Tea Party group there, led by you-know-who.
Yes, I do.
So there are those things that, they're also observing. They see their parents who are very active in various things, not just politics, and we have very, intellectual conversations with our kids and try to explain things. We even try to rationalize. I guess you can't really rationalize what Donald Trump says, but we try to explain to them that why he might be saying certain things. We don't shy away from it. So I really think that my kids and a lot of the kids who are growing up as Muslims in the United States, they are going to be a really bright future for the United States, and I think they're going to be a huge asset because they're seeing their parents go through some challenges, and I think they're going to learn from those experiences and be a great asset for our country.
My first guest, Naskah Zada, was talking about the fact that Muslims have been in this country since the beginning.
Yes.
But there's so many things that are not taught to school children because a lot of the history taught in public schools fits a certain narrative.
Right.
Do you ever see, A, the possibility of that changing? B, what would it take to change that narrative to include a more diverse history lesson for all children in our public school systems?
Well, I'm a public school teacher, and I teach 8th grade civics. And I teach in a very diverse school, which is about 40% Latino and about 35% African American. So it's a very, very diverse, and has a lot of Muslim kids in there as well, a lot of Muslim Americans, South Asians, Asian Americans. So the conversations we have in my civics classes are probably very different than other teachers might be having at other schools because they're bringing their experiences to the classroom. And when we're talking about U.S. government, when we're talking about the different political parties, and they're learning about that. So I think that our curriculums, of course, can be improved over time, and I think they will be improved over time because as you see, a lot of these kids become older and take those leadership roles and get more involved in their own kids' education, that they're going to really try to shape how the curriculum is done, and I think it's going to make our future generations more more open-minded. I really think that the millennials of our time and my kids' generation, I think they're very, very open-minded. I think they're much more open-minded than our generation is.
There's a new movie coming out called Hidden Figures about the African-American women who worked on the space program.
Yes.
It's coming out in January. And I look at that movie and I'm thinking, is the media a way in which we can reveal, tell, shed light on the history that is there but no one knows about? Is using popular media, whether it's books or movies or music, a way of helping everyone to better understand our own history that includes greater diversity than what we had growing up.
No, absolutely. I know that during Black History Month, there's a focus on really talking about African American inventors or other folks who had really contributed to American history, and it shouldn't be just around 1 month.
Right.
And I've seen over time that it's kind of gone away really, and we don't really I've seen schools not spend as much time on it as when I was growing up. I don't know why that is, but focusing on things like that. I know we have a Hispanic Heritage Month, and I know California actually, if I'm not mistaken, declared August, I believe, as a Muslim American month or something. I was reading a story somewhere, but things like that, I think media coverage is important. For example, like going back to the military, when I was in the military from 96 to 2004, in the late 90s, I believe there was only about 1,400, 1,500 Muslim Americans serving back then. And in the last 10 years, that number's tripled. There's a lot more military Muslims serving in the military. I think it's like over 4,000, closer to 5,000 now. And I talked to some of my friends who are still in the military, and that's the figure they give me. We don't really talk about that. I think a lot of the attention that's not given to the contributions of Muslims in the United States. But Khizr Khan's story, that's why I was so happy to see that, because you saw somebody who had made a sacrifice, an ultimate sacrifice for our nation, and you saw that story of a Muslim American family. And I think those kind of stories are very positive, because I think that battles things like Islamophobia, and it battles all that negative rhetoric that's coming out of Donald Trump's mouth to highlight all these positive things.
I would agree with you, and the thing about communities, like we live in a very diverse area because we live in Northern Virginia. When you get out to the middle of the country, like I think there's a large community just outside Detroit of Muslim Americans, and again, that's a religion. It's not a culture. There are Arab Muslims, there are Pakistani Muslims, there are all kinds. The Muslim faith is in so many different countries, but people tend to cluster together in a supportive community.
Yes.
So there might be places in the country that are more accepting, but what do you do about the places in the country where people truly have no idea? I mean, they don't know somebody Muslim.
Right. I mean, and like you touched on through mass media, social media, whatever different ways people see information, having that positive imagery out there to change people's mind. Because you're absolutely right, because people are not having that one-on-one interaction. They might not have a Muslim neighbor or a Muslim doctor or a Muslim business owner that they know, that they interact with. So having those positive images is very important, because African Americans, unfortunately, over time there has been, especially for male African Americans, is this negative image that has been shaped due to a lot of negative things in Hollywood and media and so forth, and it's unfortunate. So I think really trying to have more positive imagery out there will be good.
Well, I agree with you, and I just want to, in thanking you for being on the show, I want to say that you are an optimist because you are a teacher and you believe in education, and you have run for office, and I hope you'll consider running for office again, which requires the highest level possible of optimism. But it seems to me, without people like you, we are not going to move the needle forward. So
Thank you for having me, Catherine. Thank you.
Join us after the break.
She's had more than a dozen fractures. And in the next few years, she faces 2 major surgeries to strengthen her fragile bones. She's only 10 years old. Most people don't worry about fragile bones until late in life. For those with osteogenesis imperfecta, brittle bones are a concern throughout their lifetime. Find out how you can strengthen this child's future.
Diabetes is a killer. After I was diagnosed, I didn't feel sick, so I didn't listen to my doctor. Then it struck. I had a heart attack, then a stroke, and I was only 49.
Most people with diabetes also have high blood pressure and cholesterol, which can cause severe heart damage. In fact, 2 out of 3 people with diabetes die from heart disease or stroke.
Don't let diabetes destroy your life.
Call for your free diabetes survival guide. Choose to live.
to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your hosts.
Welcome back to Inside Scoop. Tonight we're talking about Americans and Muslims. Joining me in this final segment is Yasmine Taeb, who is from Arlington and has the distinction of being voted to represent Virginia at the Democratic National Committee. We're all very proud of the fact that she is the first Muslim American woman to represent, and especially she's representing Virginia. Thank you so much, Yasmine, for being here.
Sure, thank you so much for having me.
So we have crossed paths just in the course of regular Democratic politics here in Northern Virginia, but you actually have been a candidate like Atif was. You ran in a primary, which again, you have to be an optimist, first of all. But second, in addition to being Muslim, women also have a gender barrier. So tell us a little bit about, first of all, how you came to this country, which is a very interesting story, and then tell us what in the world made you decide to step up and take on this impossible hurdle.
Sure. So the way that I came to the U.S. was, so my family and I immigrated from Iran when I was in elementary school, when I was in the 2nd grade. We literally fled war and turmoil in our native country. It was during the Iran-Iraq War. It was particularly difficult for us because we came, we were all undocumented immigrants. At this point, I think in both of my elections, the House of Delegates race and DNC race, it came up and it was highlighted. And the reason why I even mention that is I think it's important for communities, for voters, for leaders to know that you have individuals in your own communities who were once undocumented immigrants and that now they've risen to this place where they're active in their communities, they're giving back, they're running for office. And I think that's inspiring for so many people in our communities. And the reason why I decided to run for office is really just that. For me, really, I felt it was an incredible privilege and to just be able to have come to America. Really, it's a land of opportunity. So I wanted to give back, and for me, public service has always been the way to show that I'm appreciative of everything that I've been given while I've been here.
Well, you've invested a lot in your education. You went to University of Pennsylvania Law School?
Penn State Law School.
Penn State Law School, and you have a degree in human rights?
Yes, a graduate certificate in human rights from Oxford.
From Oxford, yeah. I'm trying to think of your resume. You have invested a lot in not just being somebody who wants to be a public servant. You've invested a lot in having the credentials, the knowledge, the training, the education to understand these issues, not just in this country, but around the world. And a lot of your work has reflected that.
Definitely. So, and the reason for that really has been, so one of the main reasons I decided to actually go to law school was this was post 9/11. There, as Atif and your other speakers have mentioned, there's been really so many attacks against our communities and in terms of violation of our civil liberties, civil rights, in terms of our First Amendment rights, freedom of religion. So for me, one of the main reasons I wanted to actually go to law school was I wanted to provide myself with a strong foundation in constitutional law to be able to work on these issues and be able to write about them, be able to speak about them. And I'm happy that I'm able to do that right now in my current role.
Because equality under the law is the foundation of our very government.
Definitely.
And there are attacks on it all the time in various communities of interest. Muslims certainly, but I work with the LGBT community. Definitely. There's the disabled community. There's lots of communities who do not feel that they are equally protected under the laws that were the foundation of our country. So it seems to me that you had a very logical idea about how you needed to move the ball forward when talking about human rights for the Muslim community as well as everybody else in this country who is marginalized. But this overheated rhetoric seems to pose an escalated threat. I mean, how are you feeling that, and what steps do you intend to take to try to help get us past this very terrible time in our political history?
Sure. So at FCNL, which is the organization that I work for, it's a Quaker lobby, and I serve as a human rights and civil liberties lobbyist. And one of the issues that I work on is Islamophobia, and in addition to a number of other really post 9/11 issues dealing with constitutional civil liberties issues. So in terms of Islamophobia, the way I've seen really the heightened anti-Muslim rhetoric from politicians, elected officials, especially during a presidential election year, it has definitely impacted the work that I do on the Hill. One of the main issues that I also lobby on is for increased resettlement of Syrian refugees. So, I mean, this catastrophic war in Syria, the civil war in Syria, has been going on for years now, and really it's a humanitarian crisis, and all I've been trying to do in my role is to highlight how important it is for the United States to take a leadership role in terms of providing more resources and funding for refugee accounts, taking in more refugees. But it's been incredibly difficult, incredibly challenging because of the political climate and the rise in anti-Muslim rhetoric. I mean, there have been so many threats by elected officials in Congress, calling to shut down the process, the refugee resettlement program, specifically not taking in any Syrians, or in terms of Donald Trump, he's also called for a Muslim ban. So it really is damaging to the work that human rights advocates like myself work on.
So and I am hearing this in very odd places, like in Radford, Virginia, where the city council wants to pass some ordinance not to take Syrian refugees, when in fact that's not even on the table, has not been on the table. But the fact that a local governing body would take on that and proactively want to ban should give all of us pause.
Definitely.
It's a small city in Southwest Virginia. From the state government perspective, what role does the General Assembly have in any of this, as opposed to at the federal level? Sure.
So even when the debate around the Syrian refugee crisis was really picking up, and this was in the fall right after the Paris attacks in November, so you may recall there were a couple of state legislators in the General Assembly, Republican members, who specifically were calling for Governor McAuliffe to shut down the doors of our state to any refugees from Syria. And that to me was really appalling for an elected official to do that in the middle of the largest humanitarian crisis since World War II. So I think in terms of what state elected officials can do in the General Assembly is really push back on that rhetoric. In terms of speaking out and wanting to do more and uniting around this issue and letting refugees know they're welcome in your communities, letting your Muslim neighbors know that you're there for them, that they're welcome in your community. So I definitely think that there's a really important role for elected officials, even in the state legislature, to play on this.
Well, you come at it from a unique perspective because you have been a war refugee. There's not too many people who A, can say that, and B, know somebody who can say they fled in desperate circumstances, fled for their lives. Most Americans can't plug into that. Like, that's not a situation we've ever been in, and we don't know somebody who's been in that situation. And the national narrative is playing against that. And so moving forward, and you are one person, but I know that you work for an organization and that there's a lot of organizations that are trying to work together to turn this narrative around.
Definitely. No, and I think that the more we talk about it and the more we highlight it, I think the better for us. So for example, last week, this young woman that I know, I met her at a candidate training program for the PCCC, Ilhan Omar. She recently just, she's victorious in the Democratic primary in Minnesota for a seat at the state legislature. Wow. And she was, so she's Muslim American, she's Somali American, she wears a hijab, a headscarf. That was really historic, and not just for their state, but for our entire country. And she was a former refugee. So her story has been really highlighted by a number of these refugee organizations for that reason, to show that, look, she came here as a refugee, but she's giving back. She's been so active in her community, and her community leaders, elected officials have recognized that, and that's why they've been supporting her. I think the more we really highlight those stories, I think it's going to be helpful for us.
So you take me to the next logical progression, which is we have women, diverse women, just like this woman in Minnesota, just like yourself, who want to step up and to serve and to want to be the diversity that is in our communities already. But gender is a whole different layer on top of this. I have found in my experience that men are very ambitious. And because we've always had men in these positions, they tend to move people with whom they have a relationship or with whom they resonate into these positions. Tim Kaine did the most marvelous video for Hillary Clinton where he said strong men need to stand up and support strong women. And that probably resonates with any woman who's ever run for office, because it's not enough to be qualified, it's not enough to have a passion, it's not enough to get out there and do the work, it's not enough to talk about your policy. What it comes down to is, how are the people, particularly the men who already have a seat at the table, going to step up and help you get over that hurdle?
I think that is so incredibly important, and I loved Tim Kaine's speech. He also, if I recall correctly, he gave it at our breakfast delegation in Philadelphia at the DNC convention as well. I mean, yes, I think it's incredibly important for females, for women, especially women of color, to run for office. But we are doing that, and what I think is more important is to have the men in our communities support these strong women, and that means supporting them with fundraising, with resources. I think it's not just enough to say, okay, great, there's an open seat, Yasmine, why don't you go for it?
Why don't you run for that? Why don't you run for that? As if running, no, women want to run and win.
Correct.
And men know what it takes to win because they've been doing that for 250 years. So we have to ask ourselves, what kind of request are we going to make of the many men in our party particularly to say, what are you willing to do to help women who represent the diversity in our community actually get into office?
And I think it's so important for them to be there for them, to encourage them to run, especially minority females, to provide them with any assistance that they need. I think that's incredibly important.
And we know a lot of wonderful men, and again, Tim pointed out that women helped him get elected, his wife, all the women who campaigned and raised money, and we have helped a lot of men get elected, and they're wonderful men, and I would not take anything away from any of them. But I do think we've reached a point where we, as women, need to turn around and ask men to to support us. So thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you.
And I want to encourage you to continue to run for office again, to continue the work that you are doing. It's so important to get out and talk about these as an immigrant, as someone who is a refugee from war, to put a face on the refugees that we hope to welcome into our country. So thank you again.
Thank you so much.